Let's turn over to the book of Colossians, chapter 3. I've been teaching on how to follow God's will, and man, I think that there have been some powerful, powerful things said. I believe that people's lives are being impacted, and I believe that there's going to be lots of people that will never be the same after this weekend. I really believe that. You know, one of the songs that Charlie and Jill were singing this morning, I forget right now which one it was, but anyway, it was just, I was getting something about you need to appreciate what God has done, be thankful for what He has done. And as I was sitting there singing that song, I was thinking about this week. And you know, we need to appreciate what God has done. God's been here. These testimonies that Melinda was giving, people have been healed. The presence of the Lord is here. People's lives are being changed. And sometimes we don't really appreciate what a miracle it is, but there are people's lives being changed. This has been a special week. I believe God has been here moving and touching people. It's been awesome. And anyway, I've been talking about how to follow God's will. We've talked and used Moses as an example. I want to share with you now one of the most important things that God ever showed me about this. And I laugh because everything I teach is one of the most important things that God has ever shown me. But you know what? That's all I do is teach the real fundamental things. I only teach the real basics. I don't go into anything strange. This is one of the most important things. God used these verses to change my life. I had an encounter with the Lord March the 23rd, 1968. And in April of 68, 42 years ago, God gave me these verses, gave me one of the most important things I've ever learned from the Lord. This is 42 years I've been walking in this, and this has become one of the most foundational truths that God has used in my life. And I have used this thousands of times. I'm still using it today. This is something that has become a major deal in my life. And let me just set this up by saying that I was 18 years old. I had this experience with the Lord where God just poured His love out in my life. And for 4.5 months, I was gone someplace, caught up in the presence of God. I knew that God loved me. And I immediately lost my desire for anything except God and whatever God wanted me to do. This goes along with what I taught on Thursday night about delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. And immediately, my heart just began to desire God and desire the things of God. And I lost all interest in school. And I had a horse that I rode every day of my life. I'd been doing this for a couple of years. We bought this horse when I was in high school. And I rode that horse every day of my life. If it rained or snowed or whatever, that horse was just a focal point of my life. And it was 4.5 months later before I even thought about that horse. I didn't know if that horse was alive, if anybody had taken care of it. I just forgot everything. I fell in love with God. And immediately my desires changed. I lost my desire for a secular education and becoming a math teacher like everybody else in my family. Everybody in my family except one uncle was a school teacher. And he was married to a school teacher. Everybody in my family has always been a school teacher. And I lost my desire for all of that. And so I was just excited about the Lord, and I wasn't anticipating or thinking about what response I'd get from people. I thought everybody would be thrilled that I loved God. I was just shocked. I thought everybody would be just happy for me that I really had this encounter with the Lord. And to my surprise, they came out of the woodwork to criticize me and to tell me I was of the devil and all of these things. And so anyway, one of the very first things that happened was I just lost all of my desire to go to school. So I just, in passing, told my mother, I was in college, first year of college, and I just told my mother, I said, you know what, I'm going to quit college. And boy, my mother just exploded. You can't do this. My mother sicked a number of Baptist pastors on me that started telling me that you're of the devil and this is the devil. And here I was, I'd been born again since I was 8 years old, but this was the first time I'd ever really begun to start seeking the Lord and having a lot of interaction with the Lord, and I was young at it, and here were these people that were professionals. They'd been to seminary. They had been through all of this schooling, and they were telling me that I was of the devil, and at first it just rocked me back on my heels, and it took away my confidence. And one of my youth director he came to me and he says, your mother doesn't want you to do this. And so as long as you're living at home, you need to obey your mother. And you know what? I decided, well, that makes sense. And so I decided to put that on the shelf. And so for about 2 months, I continued to go to school, but I hated it. I mean, I hated it with the passion. I don't have the words to communicate to you how I hated going to school. And I know some of you think I'm making fun of this, but I'm serious. I hated going to school. I didn't just not desire to go to school. I hated going to school. And prior to that time, I had loved going to school. And God just changed my heart, but I wasn't sure about things. And because my mother was upset over this, and every spiritual person, there was only 2 people on the planet that I knew that didn't condemn me, and that was Joe Ney and Steve Mock, this good friend of mine. And they were the only people that didn't think I was crazy. Every other person on the planet thought I was crazy. And there was reasons for it, because back during this time in 1968, I had a deferment from the draft if I stayed in school. So I was deferred from the draft if I stayed in school. I was getting $350 a month from the government. My father's Social Security, he died when I was 12 years old, and if I stayed in school, I got $350 a month, which in 1968 was quite a bit of money. I was living at home. Everything was good, but if I quit school, I got drafted. I got sent to Vietnam. I lost this money. I could lose my life. And so there was just a lot of people telling me that this is crazy. And so because of that, I didn't do what I felt like doing. But man, I was miserable. On one hand, I was caught up in the presence of the Lord. It was wonderful. I was having a great time. But I mean, when I went to class, it was the pits. Of course, the truth is, I honestly never made it to class. I would go to college every day, but I'd get there 10 minutes early, and I'd start witnessing to somebody and telling them about Jesus. And then, you know, it'd go past the time I was supposed to go to class, and I couldn't go to class and let this person die and go to hell, so I'd keep talking to them. And by the time I got through talking with them, I'd already missed 15 minutes of the class, and so I'd start talking to somebody else, and by the time the next bell rang, I was talking to somebody else. So I went to class every day, and I think I might have made it into class 2 or 3 times. But anyway, it was just terrible. I hated it. And I was just, going through the motions and doing something that I didn't feel like in my heart. And anyway, in Romans chapter 14, verse 23, let me just turn over and read this verse to you. What we would typically do, I would get together with these 2 friends of mine, and we would sit around and study the Word until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And we would just talk about the Lord and pray. And anyway, we were just reading through Scripture. And even though I read the Bible a number of times when I was a kid, I hadn't read it under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. It wasn't alive to me, and it was like the Bible was brand new. And as we studied the Word, man, we would be reading things, and it had just come alive. And I read this verse that night. It was about the end of April, or it could have been the first part of May, 1968, and it says, "He that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin." And the Lord spoke to me and said, "You aren't in faith concerning school. You don't want to go. You don't think I want you to go. And yet you're staying there because of the criticism of other people. And so you aren't in faith. You're living in sin." Boy, I had never seen that before. That was a revelation to me, that whatsoever is not of faith is sin. The Lord told me, He says, you would be better to get into school and stay there believing that's my will, or to get out of school and face whatever consequences believing that's my will. But for you to be doing something that you don't have confidence in, that it's God's will, you're in sin. And man, that really shook me. And I remember we would stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock every night visiting and fellowshipping. It was about 8 o'clock or maybe 9 o'clock at night, and I told my friends, I said, I'm going home. I said, I'm going to pray. I'm going to make a decision, and I am not going to be living in sin tomorrow. I'm going to do something in faith. I'm going to get in or out of school in faith. I don't care if it hair lips the devil. I'm going to make a decision and commit myself one way or the other. So I went home that evening, and I started praying, and I said, Father, I'm not in faith. I'm in sin. I don't want to go to school. I don't think this is your will, but everybody else says that I'm missing you and that this is sin and everything else. And so what do I do? And so I determined that before I went to bed that night, I was going to have a word from God and make a decision on which direction my life should go. And I didn't know how to do it. I just knew that I had to make it. And I prayed and I sought the Lord and I was asking God, and the Lord led me over here to Colossians chapter 3. And as I was studying the Word that night and praying and asking God for direction, it says in verse 15, it says, let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which ye